Hi, welcome to MamaFuel. My name is Anne Ferguson. I am your host, and I'm thrilled to bring you this podcast that was created to fuel every mama's heart, soul, mind, and body, and hopefully spark a dream or two along the way. My mission is to change the way that we mamas treat ourselves and each other so that we feel better, live happier lives, and change the world one happier family at a time. In the MamaFuel podcast, I'm sharing real, raw, and often funny conversations with amazing mamas from around the world to remind you that you're not alone and that you're doing amazingly on this wild journey of being a gorgeous woman shepherding small humans as they make their way on our beautiful planet. You are amazing, and I cannot wait to share this conversation with you. Let's get started. Hi there. Have I got a treat for you? This week is a very different episode of MamaFuel, the podcast, because for the first time, I have two firsts. One first is I'm interviewing a couple, which is very exciting, and they're so in love and in sync that it is a joy to talk to them, and it was such a pleasure to speak to them live after following them for a long time on Instagram and various other places. And the second first is that one of the members of the couple is a dad, and not only a dad, but a transgender dad. So, in fact, there are many more than two firsts in this episode, and it thrills me to be able to broaden the diversity of the conversations that I'm having here on the podcast and the number and type of guests that I'm bringing you, because I know that these conversations will enrich your inner dialogue and hopefully the conversations that you're having out in the world. So without any further ado, I can't wait for you to meet Katherine and Nick North, an exquisite, beautiful couple of amazing humans raising 5 kids and a very naughty puppy in conservative Alberta and doing an amazing job at being extraordinary humans. I know you'll love this conversation as much as I did, so get ready to be deeply moved. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. My name is Anne Ferguson, and I am jumping up and down because this conversation that I'm going to share with you is one that I have been excitedly looking forward to for weeks. And it took me some time to work up the nerve to ask my guests this week to be on the podcast. And I said guests with an S at the end, if you're paying attention, because this is the first time that I have 2 amazing guests at the same time. And they happen to be a couple, and they happen to be extraordinary parents, humans, public figures who have become advocates, and so much more besides. So Nick and Katherine North, I am so delighted to welcome you on the show. Welcome. And Nick, you're the first dad on the podcast, so welcome.
Woohoo, we're so excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're feeling jazzed.
It's fun. And you're in Canada, so I feel like, the little connection of me being Canadian far away.
Our souls. Yeah.
Our souls. I might say I never do, but just
for good times. Just let it, feel connected.
Yeah, that's right. So to give people a little bit of context and for our conversation, can you tell us what your life looks like right now?
Sure. So we are here in Nick's office, which if you're watching this, you can see, which is where we spend a lot of our days. He works here in his office. I work upstairs in my office, but we both work at home. Mm-hmm. So home is very much what life looks like right now. We live here, we parent here, we work here,
we fight here,
we are married here. And together we have 5 kids. The oldest is days away from turning 13. The youngest is 4. So life looks kind of crazy.
And the dog. Don't forget the dog.
Oh, yes. Wallace fucking North.
The worst dog in the world. She is literally the worst puppy who has ever been.
And yet, I just love her with everything inside of me.
He does. He loves her. I love her less. I still love her, but ish. I literally went to pick up the kitchen scissors this morning, and I was like, did you know that Wallace chewed the handles off of these scissors? And he's like, yeah.
Yeah, it happened a couple weeks ago.
La. What was that? Pass the butter.
Uh-huh.
So life looks chewed on a little bit.
Life looks a little bit chewed on. Okay, so, and you live in suburban Calgary.
We live actually in a small town outside of suburban Calgary, even more suburbs.
Okay. Burbs of burbs.
We live in the burbs on burbs in a small town that is has a super high Mormon population. And then we're super queer.
You are super queer, which makes it super even more interesting.
Makes it super fun.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So that's going to lead me to another question, but I'm just going to put a pin in that in my head because I want to ask you my second question that I ask all of my guests, and this is where the fun is going to all open up, which is tell us about your entrance into motherhood. And I'm just going to say, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, that you both have had an entrance into motherhood and then a transition into fatherhood for you, Nick. So I don't know who wants to go first.
Yeah, my transition into motherhood looked, I think, really similar to most. I got married when I was 19, not so similar, to the nicest guy ever. And then at 23, I had my first kid. We bought a house and did the thing and had jobs. And we're like, well, now we'll have children because that's what one does when they buy a 3-bedroom house. And
of course, you got to put kids in them.
You got to put kids in it.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do. And I was following a formula of like how to be a good woman. And so I had my first kid and it was life-changing. And I almost died. I had a postpartum hemorrhage and had to have 2 blood transfusions. And I can definitely say that my life was like a before and after. That like having kids changed me. And all of a sudden it gave me this like purpose for life where life sort of felt like, I don't really know what I'm doing here or why. And it all feels sort of meaningless. And like, we're just, all right, here we are. It gave me this reason for living and like this joy and this happiness and this like, oh, I have this reason now. I have something. And then of course I was swiftly followed up with postpartum anxiety, which turned out was my therapist was like, actually, that's more common than postpartum depression. And so it's just that people think that they're supposed to be anxious as new parents, they don't feel like they're supposed to be depressed, but they do feel like they're supposed to be anxious. And if they're not anxious, they probably aren't doing it right.
Because worrying equals love.
Exactly. And so I went through like a super intense period where I was like, I'm not doing it right. And I'd have panic attacks if like I didn't vacuum the whole house every day. And if I hadn't like ironed the sheets, because I sort of felt like, oh, like to be this good mom, like I had the idea of being what a mom was. I didn't grow up with a good mom myself. And so my idea of what a good mom was like this, like stereotypical 60s mom who had dinner on the table at 5:30 and like whose house was spotless. And I had the luxury of getting to be a stay-at-home mom. And so I thought of it as a luxury. In other ways, it was sort of like a cage. But I went through this whole thing where I was trying to figure out who I was. And then I couldn't figure it out. And so I was like, well, I'll have another baby because that
felt good.
It felt really good to have that baby. And so literally 16 months later, I had my second kid. And I had 2 under 2. And I was like, I am really good at birthing children because I birthed this one in 4 hours and I didn't almost die. And so like
winning,
so good at this being a mom thing. And like the joy held on a little bit longer that time. And then that kid, he had some issues, like some learning disabilities, and they thought he was on the spectrum, and he didn't speak until he was 4. And so my whole life was just like caught up in being a mom to these 2 humans, and I didn't have an identity outside of that, really. I had that, and I was a photographer. And so all of who I was tied up in this idea of like, I am just this mom and I can just do this thing and it's this one thing that I'm good at. And because of that, I don't think that I had the time or the space or I didn't allow my mind to figure out what else was wrong and what else was missing.
Right.
Which it turns out was the fact that I secretly was a man. So
minor detail,
small things.
Small things.
Yeah, details.
Yeah.
Not details.
Not significant in any way, shape, or form to your life.
Yeah. And then
you're on Earth.
It's no big deal at all. So then, 4 years went by and it turns out the kid wasn't on the spectrum and he did talk and he went through all sorts of early interventions and he's plugging along like a wicked little typical kid. And so then I was like, well, I feel really sad. I'll have another kid, as one does. And it worked again. Again, for like 6 months, I was so happy with this tiny little human who like the world, I could just love it and cherish it and nurture it. And it gave me purpose. And so 13 months later, I had another one.
Number 4.
Damn. So 4. So I used to want 4 kids. I was like, I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to have 4 kids. And I had 2 under 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you and me both. We did that thing. I always wanted 4 kids. It was like I was going to, And then I had 2 under 2. And I was like, whoa.
I'm good.
Hold the phone. That's a terrible choice. And then I waited 4 years and was like, I think I would have more kids right now if we could just have a kid. If like having a kid happened for us, we would probably have another for sure.
To round it out, because even numbers.
Yeah, for sure.
But we're out of room in our car.
Yeah.
The car thing is an issue, right? Aside from all the other philosophical, financial, bloody-blah, it's the car.
Climate change, all of it. Yeah.
All of it. Like, human responsibility. None of that matters. It's the car. It's just
logistics.
Yeah.
So then I was really, really, really sad. Like my sadness in between children got shorter and shorter, which is why I kept having them closer and closer together. And then after I had my last wonderful, beautiful baby, that was a traumatic birth. He was born via emergency C-section on Christmas Day, 4 weeks early. And I am one of the 2% of the population in which an epidural does not work. And so I had to be put under. And then when I woke up, he was in diabetic shock and had to be transferred to a NICU in a different hospital. And so I didn't get to even hold him for 12 hours. And so for me, there wasn't that somehow everything went wrong and I didn't have that that fill up. And that's when sort of my world fell apart.
Wow. Oh, I just want to take a second there because I can imagine the terror when you've been it doesn't sound like the first birth was easy, but you've brought 3 humans into the world, right? In comparison. And then suddenly this newborn, I also had a situation where I went into shock after my daughter was born through a C-section, and they took her away. And they wouldn't even let us go up in the elevator on the same elevator. Like I was somehow going to contaminate her. And they took her away for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And yeah, I really feel you. I feel you because there's we didn't have skin to skin until the next day. And just, so I don't
think we talk enough about birth and what a powerful rite of passage it is, right? And how when things get really scary, that people will always say, oh, well, you have a healthy baby. Isn't that great? And of course, that's wonderful, but it doesn't change the fact that for this mother, this person has gone through something huge and life-changing. So anyway.
Terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say in that moment that Katherine was my best friend. She was my new best friend. And I had just gone through this traumatic, terrible, no good birth. And I was like, I want a do-over. I take it back. Yeah. This is a hard no.
Put the baby back in and let's do this.
Yeah, we need to do this whole thing again because that did not work out for me. Yeah. And she was just this safe person who was like, let's talk about it. Let's you can have your feelings. You can create new ritual in the world that allows you to have that connection with your baby, that rite of passage that isn't necessarily a hospital room, or a midwife clinic or wherever you choose to birth your baby. And so she was my best friend. And then she was my best friend who I accidentally fell in love with.
Oops.
Whoops. And so when my baby was 5 months old, I realized I was in love with my best friend and that I had to leave my husband, and not thinking at all that my best friend was in love with me back because I was like, well, look at her. She's straight. Turns out not so straight.
Because there's a look about
There's a look, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that both of us had specifically not talked about that. Like we had talked about everything we could talk about.
Everything.
Except for sex and like who we were attracted to in relationships. Like it was just not a thing we talked about. And I think
you were married and pumping out babies.
But like, you know how girlfriends talk. Like like.
In retrospect, it's like, oh, that omission was telling.
It was telling that wasn't a thing we were talking about.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden we were talking about it and I was like, I have to end my marriage. I have to change my life. I can't live a lie anymore. And at this point, I just thought I was a lesbian.
You weren't talking about gender identity.
No, I knew as a kid that I wasn't a girl, but I had sort of blocked most of that out of my mind. Like as we do block trauma out of our mind. And so it was this like, no, I need to be with women. Like I've never felt like it just feels better. It feels right. It feels like I'm breathing. Mm-hmm. And she was like, wow, I don't think you should end your marriage or blow anything up or anything. But if you're going to, and when you're taking suitors, I would like to be first in line because she's a 75-year-old gentleman, you see. Who uses words like suitors and
you were being courteous and
I was trying to
polite,
unknown territory.
Kid gloves.
I wasn't sure how to navigate this one.
And so then I was in love and
a mom to a new baby.
Yeah.
Number 4.
So I had 4 babies. I was in love with a woman in a different country. I had to go leave my husband. And right now, because crap, I'm in love with someone else, so you probably should go leave your husband. A, and B, I'm that person who's like, once I've said something out loud, there's no going back from it. There's no, like, it's, well, I said it, it's out. It's just over.
Do you know, I was listening to a beautiful conversation that you had on the Touchpoint podcast that I will link in the show notes and encourage anyone listening to go listen to, because it is a much more detailed and in-depth explanation of your coming together as a couple. And it was so beautiful. And I was riding the bike today, listening to it with the dog running beside me. And you said, like, once I say something, like, there's no going back. And I was like, oh my God, you're so my people. Like, same. Once it's said, that's it. It's done. It's already happening.
Like, how much work did it take to get to the point where I could say it out loud? Is like, for anything, that's just who I am. So once I say it, it has to happen.
Yeah. And so that was your entry into motherhood. Let's just pause that for a second and bring Katherine in, because you had a very different entry into
very different
continent and a different setup.
So I would actually say that my entry to motherhood began a few years before I actually became a mother, when I chose not to be a mother. And I found myself living in Tokyo. I was working as an actor. I was doing theater at the time. And I found myself accidentally pregnant, and I chose to terminate the pregnancy. And it was at that moment that I grappled with, do I want to be a mother? And I have never been one of those people who wanted to be a mom in particular. It was not a thing that I had like dreamed of and hoped of. Except maybe secretly deep down, I really did want a baby. And I could not reconcile these parts of myself. But I knew for sure that at that moment in time, I was not ready to enter into motherhood. So I would actually say that was the first mothering decision I made, which I know may be controversial and hopefully isn't triggering to anyone listening. But I think that is when I entered into motherhood. And then a few years later, I again found myself accidentally pregnant. Choices, people. And this time I was such a different person, and I was in such a different place. And even though on the outside I was still working as an actor, it still didn't make a lot of sense. I didn't have any money. I was not in a long-term stable relationship, where I was sort of in the very beginning stages of a relationship. It didn't make a lot of sense. And yet there was something in me that said, this is my baby. I'm having this baby. I'm going to become a mom. And so that is how I entered into motherhood, not in any way, shape, or form, what looks good on paper. And yet there was something in me that just sort of stood up and said, okay, I'm ready. I'm here. Here I am. We're going to do this thing. And it was terrifying. I had to go find a new career, because unless you're an A-list celebrity actor, no one will hire a pregnant actor. So I sort of figured it out. I started moonlighting as a consultant. I switched from doing in-person acting to doing voiceovers, which is much more conducive when you have a big bump. And I was pregnant and gave birth in Tokyo. I gave birth at they call it a birth house. It was with Japanese midwives. And I had a water birth, and it was beautiful and wonderful and terrible and mystifying all at the same time. And there I was. I had a baby, and I had become a new person in the giving birth of this tiny human. And then 6 weeks later, because I worked for myself, as an actor / voice actor / consultant, I went back to work. I thought I was going to die. I was so sleep deprived. I was so exhausted. I was working full time. I didn't even have full-time childcare. So I was like cobbling things together. It was awful. And ironically, it was that experience that ended up giving birth to a program that I still teach to this day. I actually just got off teaching, which is called the Queen Sweep. And my life felt so chaotic and so out of control. And between the breastfeeding hormones and the mommy brain and the lack of sleep, and we were all living, my partner, the father of my daughter, and the baby and me were all living in this very tiny Tokyo studio apartment. And I literally just thought I was going to lose my mind. And I was cobbling together 4 different kind of careers, trying to, pay my bills and keep everything afloat. So in retrospect, I think that I did experience postpartum depression, but I think I was so tired and so busy that I don't think I even realized that was happening. And in many ways, I didn't feel like I emerged from that period until I stopped breastfeeding a 1.5 years later. And I realized it was as my body shifted and I kind of came back to myself, I was like, oh, I've been gone for 1.5 years.
Wow.
And so it was almost like I had entered motherhood and then I had to leave it again. And of course I was still a mom. I still had this kid, but I had to step out of that person who was so fried, who was so kind of taken over hormonally. I really did feel like I was in a fog for that whole 1.5 years. And I don't think everyone experiences this, but I really felt like a different person. And when I stopped breastfeeding and I was I came back to my body, I also came back to my own mind and heart and spirit. So then a bunch of things happened. There was an earthquake and a tsunami in Japan. I left very suddenly with my then 4-year-old and a suitcase. And I moved to Portland, where I was happily living 5 years later when I made friends with my new best friend who I met at a conference. And it was Nick. And that's sort of where we re-enter the story.
Yeah, here you are a few years later, married, parents to 5 children, and Nick, who was assigned a different gender at birth, you decide to, decide is the wrong word. You come to the place of I'm coming out. And interestingly, today at time of recording, there was a call-in show on the Swiss national radio that I listened to in the car. It's like my immersion into Swissness in the morning. And this morning's was on coming out. And they were talking to various people from the LGBTQI, and there was another letter that I'm forgetting.
A.
Is it an A?
For asexuals.
It wasn't A. It was something else. It was. I forgot now. No, I don't know.
2S is what Canadians use for two-spirit.
Maybe.
Intersex. So the I is
intersex. Yeah, the I was intersex. Yeah. Anyway, it was extra, more letters than I was used to using because I already thought I was using them all. And they were talking about coming out and how coming out isn't a one-time thing. You think about as a cisgendered person, you think about coming out as being this one event that happens. And you announce it to your family and you announce it to your friends and then that's done. But actually, and the MasterCard post that I think, Katherine, you had put up the other day, it was Nick, on Instagram, and I'll link to that in the show notes, they've just launched this new program where you can actually choose the name that's on your credit card, was such a light bulb moment for me when I realized, oh yeah, if you were born and your name was, I don't know, Sally, but actually you identify as a man and you present as a man, then every time you use your credit card, people are questioning if it's really yours. Every time you show your driver's license, people are asking if it's really you. Like it's a
every time you call the bank, because you have to deal with something and your voice sounds like a man's voice, but you have a female name. You have to, they're like, who am I talking to? And then you have to go through the extra security of like, okay, well, what did you purchase on June 11th at 2 p.m.? And you're like, oh my goodness, like every interaction is, I probably come out a dozen times a week.
Yeah. And that is something that's, for, as someone who doesn't identify as any of the letters, that this morning, because I was stuck in traffic for an hour, so I heard the whole show, was a real light bulb moment for me. So I just wanted to name that. So you come to the point where you have to end your marriage because you realize that you're in love with a woman. And so that doesn't really work in the married to a straight man thing. And then you come to this other point where you're like, well, no, actually, I'm not mom, I'm dad. Like I've been a man my whole life. And you talk about it in the Touch Point podcast. So we won't go into the detail, just mindful of time, but, but can you talk a little bit about that? Because, and also I want to mention, you made a post a few days ago where you said that people always ask you, but what about the kids? And you're like, oh my God, I forgot all about the kids. I'm so glad you reminded me. Like,
kids.
And of course, I was wondering where all my money was going.
Right. And those are the people who are living with us. They're really messy roommates.
Right.
But how it was just really beautiful how you wrote that the two of you had done nothing but think about the kids in this, as you were contemplating this transition, which was as you have said, like you had already decided, so it was done. Like there's no going back. This isn't evidence. It's already happening. So then you are talking to your kids about it. Can you tell us a little bit about that process of mom going from mom to being dad? Because from the conversation I had with my kids about you guys, in the little that I was able to share, they were like, okay, whatever. Okay.
Yeah, that is kind of how it went for us too. Yeah. We were really prepared. We had probably had like 7 or 8 therapy sessions with like the super therapist that we love so much. And we're like, we had a plan. We had things to do with our hands. It was on a specific evening that was set up to give them enough space before they went back to school to have their chance to process, understand things. We had all the things planned out. And then, we're sitting there making pizzas and Catherine was like, oh, let's do it. And she leans in with the like, so how mom doesn't really like mom stuff as much as other moms do. And like, it's sort of this like, it's because mom doesn't really feel like a mom. Mom feels more like a dad. And they were like, and they're like, pass the pepperoni. Like they just like,
you're like clammy hands and you're like,
I literally am like sweating.
And they're like, hey, that's my cheese. Stop taking my cheese.
My heart is pounding. I'm like, this is it. This is where I lose all my children.
You guys are like, this is a momentous time. Be serious.
Yes. Yeah. They couldn't care. No, they were like, okay.
Oh, yeah. They were like, all right,
that makes sense.
With what we know.
Like at one point, our oldest daughter, like that night when you were tucking her in, you were like, so big news about dad, huh? And she was like, I mean, I have eyes. Like, it's not really that big a news, She's 10 at the time. Yeah. Or 9 maybe.
They were not surprised. They were surprised, but not shocked, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And I wonder if for the older of the 4 of your kids, Nick, they had already had perhaps the bigger transition for them of mom and dad are in love and in the same house. Oops, nope, that's not working anymore.
Yeah, the trans thing was so minor in comparison to divorce.
Right, in comparison to mom's moving to a different house and we're going to like,
yeah. And for our eldest, the dad thing was so like mom versus dad. Like the transition was nothing in comparison to having to leave her home where she lived and left all her friends and her school and all of her things behind. Like me growing a beard was the least important thing that was happening for anyone. Our other kids lost their birth orders in some places. Like my oldest wasn't the oldest anymore. She was all of a sudden was second in line. And she was like, what the hell is this? Like, there were way bigger things than my gender at play. I was still the same person. I loved them the same. And I think that, you know, in going back to the therapy part, I think part of the reason why so much of it worked was because I wasn't taking who I was away from them. I wasn't saying, you can't call me mom anymore. We were saying, you might notice that people will start referring to mom as he, that I'll start calling him my husband, that people will start calling him a man. And then it might feel weird for you to call him mom sometimes, but it might not. You get to decide whatever you want to call him from now on, forever and always. He will always be exactly who you need him to be. And because we weren't taking anything from them, there was no clutchy holding on to anything. I didn't ever ask them to call me dad. They chose that on their own.
First they were like, father, exactly, father.
And neither of us can do a Darth Vader voice, so we're not going to do it for you, but it was very Darth Vader.
Yeah.
And then, you know, our kids, lots of them are in French immersion out of the split, and so they decided they would call me Papa for a little while. And then by like day 10, they had all settled into dad. Yeah. That was just what was happening. It was the easiest. It was fine. And so now we're dad, like I'm Dad Nick, and their other dad is Dad Chris. And they typically just refer to us as dad unless they need to differentiate between someone else. But like we're dad and the other dad, whichever version it is. They're at one house or their other house. It's not.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, this is just who they have. And coming back to the coming out, it means that there is a lot of coming out. You know, when they meet new friends because they've joined the new BMX team or they've done whatever, they're like, why do you have so many dads? And like, then we get to choose based on who they are. About like, everyone has like different families, different folks. Everyone's got lots of different people going on. And other people, for other people, it's like, well, I'm trans. And so I used to be their mom and now I'm their dad. And they're like, cool, that's cool. Like, that's it. We've not really had like, you know, one person was like, oh, so sort of like a tomboy. And I'm like, I said, well, kind of, except for I'm actually a man, not just wanting to do things that are more seen to be boy things versus girl things. And he was like, oh, all right, see you later, Cohen's dad. Or like whatever, like it was just this thing where like, cool.
Yeah, whatever.
I'll see you later.
That's so fascinating to me, particularly because there would potentially be the situation, given that you live where you live. It's not like you live in Manhattan where you'll see all kinds of shapes and sizes and versions of people, you know, men dressed flamboyantly as women dressed very severely as men, and like everything in between. It's incredible. It's overwhelming. And it's all like, there's no surprise in New York. Like you can't go to New York and be surprised by anything. Whereas
there's a naked cowboy playing a guitar at any given time.
Right. Exactly.
That's not where we live.
No.
But that is not where you live. You live in the burbs of, you know, way outside Calgary with a huge Mormon population. I mean, not quite blending.
No. And yet, and so it's a very straight white community. It's difficult in that way. But our kids' school has been amazing.
So amazing.
All of our kids' friends have like nothing that we've heard of. Like their parents haven't said anything to us. They haven't not let their kids come over. I've had this is a lot for our family. And I'm like, okay, well, imagine what it is for me.
Yeah. I'm so sorry for you. I hope you'll be okay.
Sorry for your delicate heart and soul. And I've only heard that through other people. And then, you know, people in the community have been like, really? It's not that hard. Here, Google this. They'll help you out. Like our friends have sort of come to our defense on things. And so it really hasn't been that big of a deal. I think that I can say that coming from a place of privilege, that I am a middle class, cis passing, which shouldn't be a privilege, and yet it is.
Yeah, for sure.
White guy who you can't I fit most of the stereotypical molds of a straight cis white guy to begin with, and so I'm easy to fit in.
And when people look at us, they don't know immediately that there's anything different about us, right? They just assume, oh, a mom and a dad, right? Like sometimes I'm going to like wave a little flag and be like, I'm queer, because you would never know from looking at us unless you know us or we start to talk about things.
Yeah.
Which I think is another kind of layer that we don't have to deal with that other families do.
Yeah. Which in some ways makes there's the good and the bad to it. In some ways, it makes it even more lonely because when we're out in the world and, when you see well, maybe you don't because you're not queer. I don't think. I didn't ask. But
no, she said she wasn't.
Oh, perfect. So, but we see other queer people and we're like, oh, it's our people. And like, it's like, how Jeep people wave at each other when they drive past.
Or people on a motorbike, they're always saying hi to other motorbike riders.
Yeah, it's like that amongst the queers, except for we're in disguise and no one knows. And so it's a little bit like,
hi, we're here.
Yeah. And then they're like, okay, it's weird. Why is this straight couple super into us? And we're like, we're not straight. And so it's a privilege. It keeps me safe in a lot of places. It lets me choose when I come out and when I don't. And yet it also is isolating.
I have 70 bajillion questions to ask you, but I'm, again, mindful of time. And I wanted to put to you some questions from one of my dearest friends who has a little one aged, if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, I think it's 7, who is very gender curious and loves to use, he was born assigned male, loves all girly things, loves the movie Frozen, likes to be called Elsa. There's such an incredibly beautiful curiosity and delight in girly stuff, and yet a confusion around which pronouns he or she wishes to have, and so on. And it's been a journey for mom and dad, for teachers in a quite conservative society, and other parents, etc. And so my friend asked quite a few things. One of the things that she said was, what would you go back and say to little you when you were small, sitting on your porch with your grandma telling you to basically shut it down because it wasn't safe, which is something you mentioned in the Touchpoint interview. Mm. What would you go back and say to little Nick?
I think it's different for me because I knew exactly who I was. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was a boy and everything was wrong. And why was I stuck in this body? Like, why didn't I get to have a penis? Why couldn't I run around in Ninja Turtle underwear and nothing else? Why couldn't I be me? And so I think it's slightly different. I think that for this awesome little kiddo, that they're still trying to figure out who they are. And maybe it's just the permission to be whoever they are, even if it's confusing to other people, that they don't have to make everyone else feel better, that they only have to make themselves feel better. They don't have to do anything for mom and dad. They don't have to do anything for the teachers. They don't have to do anything for their friends at school. That all they have to do is tell everyone else how they could feel, like how they feel better, and just focus on that. And that all the grown-ups will figure out their stuff on their own. That's not their problem.
Not their problem. And that is, I think, really good wisdom for all the humans, whether they're big humans or small humans, gender curious or not. That is just damn straight good advice. Okay. She also asked, what advice would you give to parents of gender curious or gender creative kids? And I would ask this to both of you because, Katherine, you have this really beautiful, this really privileged position of watching Nick, evolve from friend to suddenly someone who was available and completely head over heels in love with you, and to see you and to hear you. It's so obvious the connection that you have. And you talk about this in the interview again that I reference, this life and all the other lives as well. And so I would be curious to hear your perspective as well, loving someone who is going through a transition. I mean, you have a front row seat to all the things, which I know from what I've seen of your posts. I say I know. I surmise from what I'm reading that it's not easy. It's not physically easy. There's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot going on. So from both of you, what advice would you give to parents of kids who are either feel they're trapped in the wrong body or gender curious or...
I think I would reiterate what Nick said, which is that it's not your kid's job to figure themselves out, to make anyone else in the world feel better. And it's not your job to make the rest of the world feel better about what's going on with your kid. That your only loyalty is to your kid and to their truth. And because they're little kids, that truth might change 74 times. And that's okay.
In a week.
That's totally in a week, in 10 minutes maybe, right? Like you can go from tantruming on the floor to being fairies, right? Like they're kids. And so I think it's okay to take it very seriously and also hold it very lightly and know that it can and probably will all shift. Mm-hmm. And your only job is to, not your only job, but one of your main jobs is to just give your kid a safe space in which they get to explore and figure it all out in their own timing.
And love them.
And love them. I just assume that went without saying, but you're right. Sometimes that is not always the case. And there's a lot of research that shows that the crucial factor in a gender diverse kid's life that makes the difference between them going on to be very successful, healthy people versus having a lot of the struggles that we see so often in the trans community, the difference is the love of a parent.
Yeah.
That is more important than anything else. Yeah. I'm getting that correct, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that actually the stats, it's somewhere in the trans kids in specific go from being, their suicide attempt rates being in the 50s, in the high 50s, going down to being what the average teens and kids' suicide rate attempt level is, based on only the factor of do they have a good supportive support system. That is the number one factor. Are they accepted? Are their pronouns used? Are they questioned? Are they having to explain themselves again and again? Or is it just, this is who you are, I love you, I have you, whatever that looks like?
In the program this morning, they were talking about how there are people who were able, first of all, that coming out to their parents and family was not the first place that they came out, because the interviewer, who is cisgender, said, like, of course you come out to your family first. And they were like, no. That's where you have the most to lose, is where, your parents' love, your siblings, your anchor. That is where the risk is greatest. And that oftentimes what happened, one of them was a spokesperson for an association here in Suisse romande, in the Francophone area of Switzerland. And she was saying what happens is that people will tell their parents, I'm trans, or I'm gay, or I'm lesbian, or I'm pansexual, or whatever. And the parents are like, oh, I'm so glad you told me. That's awesome. Now don't tell anyone else. Like, I love you. I accept you. Don't tell anybody. Mm. And so the love, like, it's not the love only in like, yes, I love you. It's the action, I think, that's behind it, isn't it? That
yeah.
It's not enough to say I love you and I support you. It's how do you actually do that every day?
It's getting rid of the buts and the ands, right? It's the I love you, but don't tell anyone else.
Yeah.
I love you, but are you sure? I love you, but
this is hard for me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to hear the buts and the ands. Stop it. Just cut them off. They're unnecessary. Those are for you to deal with your therapist. Those are for you to deal with your support people. Those are for you and Google. Those are not at all for your kid.
Yeah.
I think that is one of them. And I think the other big thing is that you are not going to fix your kid. You are not going to make it all better. You can't. That, like, being trans means that there's this disconnect. There is this pain. That doesn't mean that you can't also experience joy to the fullest, and love and beauty and all the best things that life has for it, but you can't fix this one thing for them. It doesn't mean that they won't live a full, wonderful, amazing, fantastic life. And yet you can't, exactly. I am still sad on a regular basis. I still struggle with my body on a regular basis. It's like saying that someone who loses a limb to amputation can't be like, that they will both be sad about that and can live a full, wonderful life.
Yeah.
But
and I wanted
to take it away.
I wanted to pick up on something that you said. You said you can't fix this for your kid. And I wanted to offer that fixing implies being broken. And there is, as you say, this, from what I understand, this disconnect between who I am and what the wrapping is like. Like the pieces that I have, there's this huge disconnect from inside to outside, which I cannot even, like, even my frontal lobes can't grasp what that experience would be like. But I do, when you said, like, you can't fix that for your kid, I was like, but you're not broken.
But I didn't say you can't fix your kid. I said you can't fix this for your kid.
Right. Okay.
You can't fix this disconnect. You can't fix this, like, the feeling that is, like, you can't take it away from them. They have to, like, it is their pain. It is their, this thing. It is both their pain for some people. And for me, it's also this thing that makes me different. It makes me unique. I can now see that the thing that makes me different and that causes me pain is also the thing that makes me most beautiful.
Yeah.
And sitting with that means that sometimes it's sitting with the pain and the discomfort and the, like, sorrow of that. And sometimes it's sitting with the fact that, like, I truly do get to have this experience that most humans don't get to have. I know what it is like to be a dad and a mom. I know what it is like to see the world from both sides, and from in between, because I had that time in the middle where people didn't know where to put me. People didn't know if I was a man or a woman. I didn't know if I wanted to be a man or a woman. I knew that I felt like a man, but I also knew that I didn't want to lose my female community. I didn't want to lose my women experiences. Like, I can't be stealth because I can't take away the fact that I birthed my kids. I won't lose that.
Yeah.
I don't want to. And so it does mean that it's sitting with the conflicting feelings a lot. The dichotomy of both, of, like, I'm not sorry for having this, and yet I wish I didn't have to.
But what a beautiful illustration. Not illustration. What a beautiful example, living example. The two of you are, both as individuals, because Katherine, you've also had the journey of going from being in a heterosexual relationship, being pansexual, which is something that you, from the touch, I keep talking about the touch point interview because I listened to it today and I was just hanging on every word and learning. And I really encourage anybody who's listening to go and listen to that conversation, because you were so forthcoming in describing your journey of finding each other and falling head over heels in love, probably not for the first time in this universe. And the example of both of you being able to sit with discomfort, because it's something that we will go to such immense lengths to avoid, right? We go to such immense lengths to avoid being ostracized by our tribe, whatever that may be, even if it's a shitty tribe. It's the tribe we came from, and it's dangerous to be put out of the tribe. So we don't want to be ostracized. We don't want to be isolated. So we will do anything to fit in, even though what we want is to belong. And as Brene Brown tells us, it's not the same. And also, we'll do anything just about to not have to sit with shame, powerlessness, fear, because it's so uncomfortable. Even though they're, I'm going to use air quotes, just feelings, they drive us so much, right? And look at the two of you standing, each in your own way. And Katherine, you spoke really eloquently, but all the things you said that were, quote, wrong initially to Nick, as Nick was like, you know what, actually, I'm a guy and I want to live my life as a guy. And you had said, like, I said all these things wrong and I did all these things wrong. So you both have had and continue to have that experience as a blended family, as owners of the worst puppy in the world, as also a queer couple and a trans dad, and like, and I mean, the layers of the discomfort potential are vast and numerous, but you sit in that discomfort and you're very public about it. And I wanted to name that because it's something that for me, gives me the permission to be more vocal about the discomfort that I sit in oftentimes, being around isolation, around loneliness, around being that person who does all the things and like who looks all shiny and together on the outside and inside feels like, you know, like the pieces, like there's been an earthquake and the pieces just don't meet anymore. That it grants permission to other people to have that kind of a discourse. So I just wanted to say that I see that and that it has a real value, certainly to me, and I imagine to other people who are also following your story.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. It's funny because I work with all these amazing, super successful, total rock star women. And the truth is that everybody has some part of them that feels like that on the inside. I love the image of the earthquake, like that the plates don't quite fit together. I think everybody has that. It's like the great palace lie is that there are people who ever get to a point where they don't have that. I don't think that exists.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes we handle it graciously and sometimes not graciously at all. And we have fights and miscommunications and we hurt each other.
Like all humans, because we're clumsy.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, not like in a theoretical way, like this week, you know, like,
yeah.
Right.
Like 3 hours
before me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I talked to her yesterday. You're talking to her today.
Yeah.
She's messy, you know, and one thing that we try and do is we try and share the things that we've come through, not necessarily the things that we're right in the midst of.
Yeah.
Like some of both, but
yeah,
there's a way to like protect the tenderest, most vulnerable bits of ourselves while also sharing them, right? Like there's sort of a paradox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I have 70 bajillion questions, but I know, Katherine, that you have a call, and I wanted to ask you the last question that I always ask, which is, to each of you, where do you get, Katherine, your mama fuel, and Nick, your papa fuel? Where do you get your fuel?
I get mine from solitude. Quiet, introvert time by myself with a book is like the most potent fuel for me.
Where the hell do you get that in a house with all the people?
It is. I try and take a quarterly retreat by myself, a couple nights away, just me, no one else, not even Nick is invited.
And I get up with the kids every morning and she sleeps in and then journals.
It's true.
So she gets 45 minutes to an hour every day, every morning.
Every day. No mornings ever?
I usually do Thursday mornings when we only have one kid. It's pretty dreamy. And then I'm on the evening duty. After dinner, Nick is, at least in theory anyway, can be off. And I handle cleanup and lunches and all that stuff.
Bath and bedtime and all that kind of good stuff.
You're part of bath and bedtime too.
Yeah, I do bedtime, but because it would feel like all the kids would feel sad, I think.
Yeah, but nice to know that you've got that split. I remember reading that and thinking, oh my.
And I do have the ability. Yeah, I have the ability to, like, if I'm tired, I have the ability, like, I'm allowed to skip out on it. It's just that I most of the time choose to be part of it.
Yeah.
I think for me, filling up, I haven't quite found what it is yet. This is that spot where I'm like, ooh, as things have shifted and changed, I don't know what the new thing is. It used to be, I like a lot of bouldering, rock climbing, physical movement. After having surgery and losing a lot of my mobility, I'm trying to find new things.
I would imagine rock climbing would be hard when your pecs are starting to heal and reshape. And
it's a hard no.
Yeah. Yeah. The will is there, but the pecs are not.
They're not, no.
They'll be back. Yeah. Oh, well, I could talk to you for ages, but again, I'm aware of the time ticking, and I'm so grateful to have had the chance to connect with you, truly.
Us too.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We're so grateful.
Yeah. So fun, and I'm so happy to share your beautiful love and your gorgeous family, and I will put all of the connections into your Instagram feeds and into your websites, and I'll make sure that I have all that information so that people can find you, and I will definitely connect to, as I've referred to 7,000 times, the touch point conversation.
Love it.
It was such a good conversation. It was so good. I'm glad that he recorded that and that you said yes and you all sat on your bed and
we just basically got naked emotionally. I was like, whoa.
It was real intense, like.
Yeah, but awesome, right? Like it was, I mean, as a listener, it was great. And I will listen to it again because there's lots that I missed, I'm sure. And I would also as I was listening, I was like, would I listen to this with my kids? I don't know. Are we ready to talk about that a detached clitoris is 9 inches long. I think we were good until that point. And and it's not that I'm happy to have those conversations, but they're like, oh, Mom, I don't want to know.
We have those.
Yeah, all the time. We talk about sex all the time, and they're like, oh.
Yeah. My younger one is like, really? I want to know more. My older one's like, oh, someone kisses in a Disney movie. Oh, doesn't want to know. Thank you. I wish you a beautiful day, summer, and
friends on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk soon.
All right.
Bye. Thank you. I could have kept talking to Katherine and Nick for hours and hours, and I'm grateful to have had the time with them that I did. I think the biggest takeaway for me from that conversation was how important it is for gender curious, gender fluid, or transgender kids to hear from their parents, or even any transgender person or gender fluid or gender curious person, to hear from those they love the most that they love them, that they've got them, that there isn't an experience that we need to fix, that we can't fix the discomfort and challenge that our children will face if they are transgender or if they are treading a non-cis traditional path in life. And that the absolute best thing that we can do to support them is to love them completely, exactly as they are, even if that changes 74 times in under 6 minutes. I was just so filled up from that conversation and hope that it will have sparked something in you. I hope that there will be new information in this conversation for you. I would love to know what you thought about the conversation. So do come into the free Facebook group over at mamafuel.me/Facebook and join the conversation. And also, I urge you to follow Nick, whose Instagram handle is Epic Danger, and Katherine, whose Instagram handle is Declare Dominion, because those two accounts give a really beautiful insight into how they live their lives and how they're showing up in this world, both as parents and as humans and as leaders. They are really extraordinary, and I'm really grateful to have had the time to talk to them. I'm also really grateful to have the opportunity to be offering mamas across North America and Switzerland this year the chance to take some time to refuel. The Mama's Mini Breaks are basically all the juicy goodness of a retreat drawn into 4 to 5 hours that we spend together a little bit away from family so that you can slip away, take some time, and enjoy gentle movement, meditation, creating something beautiful either on your own or with the other women in the room, and connecting with yourself in a way that you probably don't do on a daily basis. I'm delighted to take the Mama's Mini Breaks out on the road across North America. And if you're listening to this and thinking, I wonder if she's coming to where I'm going, go to mamafuel.me/Mama's Mini Breaks, MAMAS Mini Breaks, and click on the North American Tour button on that page and tell me where you are. And if you want me to come and visit you, you can also write to me at Anne, ANNE, at mamafuel.me. And I can maybe come to where you are. I would love to do that. I love hosting Mama's Mini Breaks for groups of family members and groups of friends. It's such a fun way to celebrate a meaningful birthday or a baby shower or any other occasion for which you'd want to gather with your friends or your close relatives. I will be in Canada and in Portland, Oregon this summer, and then I will be taking the Mama's Mini Breaks on tour across Switzerland from September, and I could not be more thrilled. I'm delighted to be bringing you Mama Fuel in the form of this podcast, delighted to be bringing you Mama Fuel in the form of the mini retreats, and I would so love to get to meet as many of you on those different road trips as I could. So definitely get in touch. You can also email me at Anne, ANNE, at mamafuel.me. And I'd love to just have a conversation with you about where you are, what this podcast has meant to you, what your biggest takeaway has been, and if you can join me somewhere for a Mama's Mini Break. That's it for today. I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up the month of June, which was Father's Day that I didn't mention when I was talking to Katherine and Nick. So happy Father's Day, belatedly, Nick. And I'm thrilled to have this be our final episode for the month of June, and delighted to be bringing you a lot more exciting episodes over the summer. Hopefully see you over the summer, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now. That's it for this episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. Thanks for listening. There's a lot more conversation, sharing, and real mama talk happening in our private Facebook group. To join the virtual village, go to www.mamafuel.me/Facebook. That's MAMAFUEL.me/Facebook. And be sure to say hi when you get there. If you like this episode, or if you know a mama who could use a little mama fuel, and let's face it, we all have times when we're running on fumes, I'd love you to share this episode and to rate it and leave a review. The algorithms work that way. The more reviews there are and the more sharing there is, the more mamas will be able to feel encouraged and supported with the conversations that you just listened to in MamaFuel. Every comment helps, and it's always a super delight to hear from you. Thanks, and bye for now.